Hello there. You're watching All 24 News World News Program. I'm your host, Karim Zachary, and these are your headlines. Heavy gunfire was heard coming from the main military camp in some residential areas of Burkina Faso's capital early on Friday morning. Russian President Vladimir Putin has declared the independence of Zaporizhia and Kherson in Ukraine and is now at the ceremony in Moscow to formally annex the 4 Ukrainian territories. The Brazilian electoral campaign entered its final stretch with President Bolsonaro and former President Lula da Silva launching accusations of corruption during the final debate. Also coming up, President of the United States Joe Biden addressed Federal Emergency Management Agency staff after receiving an update on Tropical Storm Ian and declared a state of emergency. Hello again and welcome to the program. Fast in our topical news, heavy gunfire was heard coming from the main military camp and some residential areas of Burkina Faso's capital early on Friday morning. Several armed soldiers were seen taking positions along the main avenue leading to the presidency. Soldiers were also seen blocking access to administrative buildings and the national television, which has stopped broadcasting. At least 23 people were killed and 28 wounded in Russian missile strike that hit a convoy of civilian vehicles in Zaporizhia, according to the regional governor. Ambulances and emergency vehicles sped through the streets of Zaporizhia on Friday to attend to people that were killed and injured. Russian President Vladimir Putin has declared the independence of Zaporizhia and Kherson in Ukraine and is now at the ceremony in Moscow to formally annex the 4 Ukrainian territories. Putin says the incorporation of the 4 Ukrainian regions into Russia is the choice of millions of people who share a common history with the Russian Federation. Earlier, the US President Joe Biden said Washington will not recognize Moscow's annexation of parts of Ukraine, while UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres condemned Russia's annexation of Ukrainian regions.
And with your permission, I'd also like to briefly address the shameless and transparent effort by Russia to annex parts of neighbor Ukraine. The United States, I want to be very clear about this, the United States will never recognize Russia's claims on Ukraine's sovereign territory. This so-called referenda was a sham, an absolute sham. The results were manufactured in Moscow.
Any decision to proceed with the annexation of Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson and Zaporizhia regions of Ukraine would have no legal value and deserves to be condemned. Any decision by Russia to go forward will further jeopardize the prospects for peace. It will prolong the dramatic impacts on the global economy, especially developing countries, and hinder our ability to deliver life-saving aid across Ukraine and beyond.
Still in the same context, Russian President Vladimir Putin on Thursday ordered the return of Russians who were mistakenly mobilized during the partial military call-up. Speaking during a Security Council meeting, Putin admitted that some Russians were mistakenly called up after he ordered the partial mobilization last week.
Many issues are emerging during the mobilization. It's necessary to fix all the mistakes and avoid making them again. In regards to citizens who, for example, are eligible for deferment, it concerns, for example, fathers of many children, or people suffering from chronic diseases, or people who are above draft age.
To a different story now. At least 19 people were killed in a suicide blast at an educational institute in Kabul, where 25 people were wounded. The explosion occurred inside the center in the Dashti Balshi neighborhood of Kabul, according to Khalid Zadran, the Taliban-appointed spokesman for the Kabul police chief. However, there was claim of responsibility for the attack. Following the consecutive leaks in the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines under the Baltic Sea, the Russian president called the incident an act of international terror. This comes amid a war of accusations as to who should be held accountable for the attack. Nabil Khazini.
Days of drama and finger-pointing still unable to face the guilty. Up to this stage, there is no concrete element to find those responsible for the leaks identified on the gas pipelines in the Baltic Sea, but the scenarios envisaged have already emerged. The Kremlin has published a statement in which it says that the Russian president told in a phone call his Turkish counterpart that this was an unprecedented act of sabotage that was due to an act of international terrorism on the 2 pipelines.
Unprecedented nature of this event, it looks like as some terrorists possibly committed on a state level, demands of very active and energetic cooperation. It's a very dangerous situation that requires urgent investigation.
Only few days before Russia started what it calls a special military operation in Ukraine, here is what the US president said at that time.
If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine again. Then there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
Moscow, which called for a meeting of the UN Security Council on Friday, accused the United States of being responsible, taking advantage of this old statement by Joe Biden, insinuations deemed ridiculous by Washington, D.C. European leaders have already decided this was an act of sabotage.
It's very likely that it has been done deliberately and not by accident, and it's very unlikely that it's been done by anybody else than a state without being detected earlier.
The incident signaled a point of no return. Analysts say the economic damage caused by these attacks is going to land Europe in a recession as deep as the one of 2009. A jeopardy made Norway to decide to boost security around its energy infrastructure after reports of an increase in unidentified drone flights in recent weeks.
European Union energy ministers on Friday were set to approve emergency levies on energy firms, windfall profits, and launch talks on their next move to tackle Europe's energy crunch, possibly a gas price cap. This comes as Hungary says it cannot support the European Union's planned 8th round of sanctions against Russia over its military operation in Ukraine, if those contain energy sanctions. The German government has agreed on a relief package worth up to 200 billion euros to fight soaring energy prices. Mariam Zian in the following.
In the highest record of inflation since 1951, Germany announced a 200 billion euros defense shield to cushion the impact of expensive energy bills on citizens and businesses until 2024.
Dieser Abwehrschirm wird gespeist.
This shield will be funded by the Stabilization and Economic Adjustment Fund, which will provide with 200 billion euros. We will finance these 200 billion euros with a loan and thus be able to accomplish the tasks that await us this year, next year and the year after.
German Chancellor Olaf Scholz also vowed to lift the challenge and defend his country.
We are also in a position to ensure that our country, which is economically strong, can meet such an important challenge, that citizens can lead their lives, that energy prices do not go through the roof, but be manageable for everyone and for the businesses that are important to our jobs.
But despite soaring prices, Germans didn't hesitate to turn on their heating. Some say that the package aid will not suit the prices and will discourage consumers to think about saving energy. The biggest European economy used to import 50% of its natural gas from Russia before the imports declined to 20% amid the Ukrainian conflict, but is now hopeless for future Russian supplies. And in an effort to find other energy sources, German Chancellor visited Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar, but only announced contracts with the UAE. Today, not only Germany but the whole European continent struggles with rising energy prices and inflation, putting citizens and economies under pressure. So how will the old continent manage this crisis?
Thousands of people have taken to the streets in Paris and all across the French provinces to call against the rising inflation and weak purchasing power that all parts of society are suffering from. Usama Ayadi has more.
Mass protests were held in several cities of France on Thursday against soaring prices and high inflation, with several industries demanding higher wages for their employees. Launched by several trade unions in France, including energy, transportation, education and health, the protests took place in cities such as Paris, Lyon, Bordeaux, Lille and others, and were attended by hundreds of thousands of people. It was estimated by the unions that there would be more than 100 demonstrations during the day.
Our purchasing power has declined. Now even simply going out for a meal at a restaurant or going out for a drink is more expensive than it used to be.
About 40,000 people took to the streets in Paris. The union said that in the face of the inflationary pressures, the current French government's response measures could not meet the demands of citizens. Civil servants, retirees, students and low-income earners, in particular, have not received adequate support, and neither wage growth nor social assistance has been adequate. Since the end of 2021, rising oil and gas prices in Europe have driven inflation to rise, and the continued inflation has made the French people anxious. During the parade, many participants pointed out that the deterioration of the current situation is closely related to Europe's blindly following the US sanctions against Russia.
The Russia-Ukraine conflict aggravates the energy crisis and affects the food supply in Africa and Western Europe. Imposing sanctions against Russia is completely meaningless because it is a disregard for the people. It is not good for the people of Ukraine nor the people of Russia.
More and more French people have realized that imposing sanctions on Russia is not an effective way to resolve the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. On the contrary, this has caused ordinary people to bear higher prices and living costs. Among the problems that the French government will face next, the most important thing is to ensure normal heating in the coming winter, in addition to protecting purchasing power and curbing inflation.
Germany's foreign minister said she's doing everything within her power to bring about European Union sanctions against those who oppress women in Iran. 2 weeks after the death of a young woman in Iranian police custody, which sparked protest. US Senate also introduced resolution against Iran's alleged systematic persecution of women. The Brazilian electoral campaign entered its final stretch this Sunday with President Jair Bolsonaro and former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva launching accusations of corruption during the final debate 1 week before the elections.
Ex-presidiário, traidor da pátria.
Liar and corrupt. Words used repeatedly during the contentious final debate between the favorites of Brazilian presidential elections, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva and the incumbent president Jair Bolsonaro. Millions of Brazilians were glued to their TVs late Thursday expecting a fruitful final presidential debate before Sunday's elections. But the debate quickly devolved into a fierce back and forth between the two, with each lobbing personal insults and the moderator repeatedly asking them to be civilized.
Ex-presidiário, traidor da pátria.
Liar, ex-convict, traitor to the nation. Your sons had a huge scandal, stealing millions from companies after you got to power.
Lula, who has a comfortable double-digit lead going into the first round of voting, called Bolsonaro a shameless liar.
Mas é uma insanidade.
It's insane for a president of the country to come here and say what he says with utmost impudence. That's why on the 2nd of October the people will send you home, you shameless liar.
If elected, Lula said he would lift the 100 years of secrecy Bolsonaro declared on his health ministry negotiation of COVID-19 vaccines.
I'm going to do something for you. I'm going to make a decree to end your 100-year secrecy, to know why you want to hide so much for 100 years. I'm going to do it. I'm going to make a decree and sign it, to know what this man wants to hide for 100 years.
To which Bolsonaro responded, calling Lula the ex-convict, and denied all accusations.
The ex-convict says that I decree the secrecy of my family. Which decree? Give me the decree's number. He says I delayed the purchase of vaccines. No country in the world bought a vaccine in 2020. Stop lying.
Brazilians were very disappointed by the level of discussion. For more than 3 hours, few concrete proposals were presented.
A bunch of clowns arguing, without a plan, without anything, just fighting amongst each other.
The polls reflect the possibility that Lula win the first round on Sunday, according to a survey published this Thursday by the Datafolha Institute, which gives the former president a 14-point advantage and 50% of valid votes.
President of the United States, Joe Biden, addressed Federal Emergency Management Agency staff after receiving an update on Tropical Storm Ian and declared a state of emergency. Sofiane Canturi reports.
The disaster began to come into focus a day after Ian made landfall as one of the strongest hurricanes ever to hit the U.S. After receiving a briefing on Tropical Storm Ian, U.S. President Joe Biden urged those affected by Ian to seriously take the warnings from officials, to stay safe and remain indoors.
I've also spoken with mayors across the state, both Republican and Democrat, and I've told them the same thing. We are here. Whether you need, and whatever you need, I indicated to call me directly at the White House. They know how to do that. I want to say again to everyone in Ian's path, the danger is real, to state the obvious. Please obey all warnings and directions from emergency officials. And while the water is receding, don't go outside unless you absolutely have to.
The storm destroyed the historic waterfront pier and inundated homes on the state's two coasts. It also cut off the only road access to a barrier island. Governor Ron DeSantis called the situation as indescribable.
I just got back from surveying the damage in Charlotte and Lee counties, and some of the damage was almost indescribable.
After meeting with his Philippines counterpart, Jose Faustino, in Hawaii, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin claimed that his department is working to provide urgent aid. Also, the Australian Prime Minister mentioned that his nation is ready to provide support to those affected in Florida.
The department is working closely to support FEMA, the National Guard, and NORTHCOM to provide urgently needed support for the communities in the path of the destruction. I lived in Florida for many years myself, and we stand together with everyone there.
I've indicated to our friends in the United States that Australia remains, as always, prepared to provide any assistance and support that we can at this difficult time. So we stand with the United States, as always.
Thousands of Floridians were trapped after Hurricane Ian destroyed homes and businesses and left millions in the dark. Before heading to Florida, Ian crossed western Cuba. It initially knocked out power to a few provinces, but problems compounded and soon the power grid collapsed nationwide, affecting 11 million people.
The Reserve Bank of India joined its international counterparts in taking aggressive action to combat rising prices in the wake of Russia's war in Ukraine on Friday by increasing its benchmark repo rate by 50 basis points to 5.90%, the fourth increase since May. The Monetary Policy Committee of the Monetary Policy Committee, of the Central Bank decided to raise the rate with immediate effect by a vote of 5-1 during its meetings from Wednesday to Friday. The Chinese President Xi Jinping and other leaders of the Communist Party of China and the state attended a ceremony on Friday morning in the Tiananmen Square in Beijing to present flower baskets to fallen national heroes. The event was held to mark Mother's Day, a day ahead of the National Day in China, the day which marks the anniversary of the establishment of the People's Republic of China in 1949. The Electoral Main Committee in the first constituency announced the 10 winners of National Assembly for the 17th Legislative Term 2022, which took place on Thursday. Polling stations closed for the 17th Legislative Term 2022 elections at 8 o'clock in the evening, which witnessed 305 female and male candidates competing for 50 seats in the parliament. The President of the Republic of Mauritania received at the Presidential Palace, in Nouakchott, the Sahrawi Minister of Interior, Mr. Omar Mansour, as special envoy of the President of the Sahrawi Arab Republic, Mr. Ibrahim Ghali. The Sahrawi Minister of Interior handed the President a letter concerning the developments of the Sahrawi issue in the light of the efforts of the special envoy of the Secretary General of the United Nations, and affirmed the brotherly relations and good neighborliness between the two countries.
It was an honor for us to be received by Mr. the President. We conveyed to him a letter from his brother Ibrahim Ghali, President of the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, concerning the developments of the Sahrawi issue in the light of efforts of the United Nations Special Envoy for Western Sahara. The meeting was an occasion to listen to the advice of His Excellency President Mohammed Ould Sheikh Al Ghazwani on this subject, which goes in line with the brotherly relations and good neighborliness between the two brotherly countries, and the consultations that the two leaders have been doing on issues of common concerns to the region.
The Sahrawi delegation taking part in the annual Congress of the British Labour Party insisted on the responsibility of the British government as a permanent member of the UN Security Council to put pressure on the Kingdom of Morocco and bring it to respect the Council resolutions that affirm the right of the Sahrawi people to self-determination. The delegation from the Polisario Front, led by its representative in the United Kingdom, took part in the Congress at the invitation of the leaders of the British Labour Party and informed the participants of the latest development in the Sahrawi cause and the new worrying situation in the Sahrawi territory. Still in Africa, but this time in Sudan, where Sudan continues to be affected by the rainy season, which causes floods and flash floods, killing at least 146 people and injuring 122 others. Floods have impacted around 600 schools, affecting the education of about 140,000 children. Earlier this month, the Sudanese Ministry of Education postponed the start of the 2022-2023 academic year in the country until October to allow rehabilitation of damaged schools. Nearly 30 years after the 100-day massacre that left 800,000 dead, a frail 87-year-old Rwandan accused of inciting and funding the country's 1994 genocide refused to attend the opening of his trial at a United Nations tribunal on Thursday. The start of Felicien Kabuga's trial is a crucial day of reckoning for Rwandans who survived the killings or whose families were assassinated, even though he is one of the last fugitives charged over the genocide to face justice.
This case concerns Felicien Kabuga and his individual responsibility for serious crimes committed during the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda between the 7th of April and 17th of July 1994.
And finally, in our news, the Algerian national football team for local players defeated its Sudanese counterpart by 2-0 without any goal, in the second friendly fixture in anticipation of the African Nations Cup for locals scheduled in Algeria in January. The event was hosted by the new Olympic Stadium Miloud Hadfi complex in Oran. This game came after the Desert Warriors' first friendly fixture against Nigeria at the Constantine Stadium, which ended in a scoreless draw with 2 goals scored by each team.
To be honest, when you are the team who received this competition, yes, of course, the people put you as a favorite, but I will take off this pressure. Most important that we take game after game as a final. Of course, we go with this determination to win it, but step by step, don't start to talk too much or something like this. Let's the cup start and we play the first game and we will see, inshallah.
And with this, ladies and gentlemen, our news bulletin comes to an end. And for more news, don't forget to follow us on our social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Thank you for watching and take care.